Hi, I'm Carol Owens, and this is Stockbridge Updates. There's two things from this week's issue that I would like to share with you. It's an interesting issue, but two things stand out. One, Charlie Kinney, who is the chair of the Board of Health, contacted on our behalf, we posed the question, and contacted the DPU, which is the Department of Public Utilities, and the DEP, which is the Department of Environmental Protection, and asked if Housatonic residents, in lieu of having Housatonic Water Works water, would like to dig a well. Is it safe that close to the river? Thinking if there are PCBs in the river, you're digging down, could there be some kind of interchange? Would the water in the well have PCBs? We were quite startled to learn that they don't have any answer, that no one's tested for it. Presumably nobody's asked the question before. Secondly, in this new administration, it's become clear to all of us that we can't depend upon the way things were. Different services will be cut, funds cut, employment down, so the provision of service will be lessened. And we know, and it's frequently reported, that for individuals, this might take some economic shuffling if there's no SNAP, if there's no Medicare, if there's no Medicaid, if Social Security is cut. There's a segment of our population that's going to have to figure out what they can pay for and what they're going to have to do without. But what you may not have thought about is this is going to happen for the states and the state budget, as well as for individuals and their little household budget. So that 25% of the budget of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts comes from federal funds, 25%. And if some or all of that is not forthcoming, the state is going to have to do a great shuffle of what and how to pay. What are the most important things? How do we move the money around and pay for those things? How do we find ways to earn more or ways to spend less? So read all about it in this issue. And now I have a great pleasure to introduce a fellow journalist. His name is Bill Shein. He is a journalist extraordinaire and a very good conversationalist, so welcome.
Well, thanks. Great to be here, and thanks for that extraordinary and over-the-top introduction.
You deserve it. You know, you and Mickey Freeman are known locally for being long-form journalists. And just simply put, if I write a column, I limit myself to 800 words. Mickey Freeman and Bill Shein don't. So you get a longer, more in-depth view of the subject that they're addressing. Tell me about that. Tell me about that decision and the feedback you get, that whole thing.
Sure. Well, I had started out as writing a column for the Eagle, so I was originally limited to the 650 to 700 words.
Right.
It was a different kind of writing. It was humor and opinion as opposed to news reporting. And when I returned to journalism a few years ago and looked at the landscape here and felt like there was some space for more fully told stories, and having the opportunity to work on a story for a few weeks or even a few months and present something that is more complete, more perspectives, interviewing a few dozen people.
Yeah, I was going to say you do a lot more interviewing than an opinion columnist usually
very much so.
does.
Yeah. So compared to maybe a reported column where you would interview some people but still, maybe shape an argument, much of the work that I'm doing today is, these fully told long-form stories and trying to tell local stories, with some broader regional and national context. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the Housatonic Waterworks and state agencies and federal funding and the intersections of all of those things that play into local issues. So a long-form story presents an opportunity to, talk to a lot of people, do a deep dive into government documents and other things, and, try and present something that is, while not entirely exhaustive about a topic, because that would be a book-length project, right. But, to let readers know, here's something that, maybe you're going to spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes reading this, but it will give you, hopefully, some perspective and a lot more information than you might get in a series of news stories.
And I just want to share with the audience that, but for a writer, it depends so much on what your job is. A reporter is supposed to tell you who, what, where, when, and possibly why in a limited number of words. So you get the event reported. It's meant to be pretty objective. If you turn to the opinion page, where you'll find me, I'm paid to have an opinion. So I am writing an opinion piece. And I think, Bill, what you're saying is when you get into long form, you're balancing doing both. Am I hearing that right?
Maybe to a small degree. If you think about the different kinds of long form journalism that's out there now, you might have a long story in the Sunday New York Times that's pretty in-depth news story. When you look at magazine journalism, look at long-form pieces in, in a publication like the New Yorker, or the Atlantic, you have a little more flexibility, not necessarily for opinion because it's based on interviews and research, but you have a little more space to experiment with the form and sort of narrative journalism and provide some personal perspective, or at least in the way you write about it. So I wouldn't call it opinion in the same way that a column on the op-ed page is an opinion. Yeah. But you have a little more flexibility. Anyway, I come out of from with an opinion background. But what's been interesting over these recent years is, I got pretty, even though you get paid for your opinion, I got kind of tired of always having to have an opinion on things. And this kind of work is really interesting because there certainly are other pieces and commentary pieces that I'll do about some of the things I've reported on. But it's really been satisfying to listen to other people's opinion and try and synthesize all that.
Right. I just want to underscore that, and then I have another question for you. All of us work very, very hard to balance reporting and opinion, and it's not that easy.
It's not, and it's one of the reasons why I started the Berkshire Argus was to provide a home for fact-based long-form stories. In the environment, not just across our region, where we're not a news desert here. We've got local publications like yours. We've got the Berkshire Edge that covers South County. We've got the Eagle, that covers countywide. We've got a few radio stations. We don't have an awful lot of opportunity for longer form and in-depth, investigative and accountability work. It's something that I think fills a gap. And in this environment, not just here, but with social media and things that are information sources for a lot of people today that are not journalism based, they're not fact checked, they're not approaching stories with the same kind of rigor that journalists would. I think it's important to have a chance to dig into some of these things, dig up the facts, which takes time and resources, and add that to the conversation.
And they're not always curated. Some of our local papers, and there are, we have 18 small towns in South County, or in what they call District 3. And we're approaching 18 little itty-bitty newspapers, and sometimes it is, if you submit it, they'll print it, and that's what I mean by curated. There isn't an editor saying, this isn't ready yet, this has to be rewritten, this isn't good for us, we're not printing this, and so forth. And then the next step on what they accept is to edit it for many things, and prejudice is one of them. But here's a problem that I have, and I wonder if you do, and I was thinking about the airport story that you did and other work that you've done. I almost always know a great deal more than I feel comfortable publishing because we're such a small area. We have a county-wide population of 125,000. It's almost possible to know everybody.
Yeah.
And in a smaller geographic area, it's almost possible to know everything about them. And I wonder if you find that and how you balance it, because I feel like I'm balancing it every time I pick up a pen.
It's an interesting question. I think one of the things that oftentimes people in our region are not used to, because of the kind of journalism that we've had, and particularly the lack of accountability journalism, which this goes back many decades. This isn't a new phenomenon, but it is right on that issue of balancing. Small communities, people know everybody. But let me frame it this way. So you wouldn't be surprised at all to see an in-depth story, an accountability story about somebody that we elect to the Congress or to the Senate,
right?
To the U.S. Senate, and maybe to a lesser degree to the folks that we elect to the State House. When it's your local select board member or someone that's on the Board of Health, lots of volunteer positions. It's a different response when you report things that are oftentimes in the public record, things that were said at meetings, things that are in public documents. But it can be surprising to suddenly read that in a local publication about people that you know.
Yeah.
So to your point, there is a balancing act, but I think it's important, as long as the work is fair, that you give everybody an opportunity to comment on what you're presenting. That's the nature of journalism, and I think it's important to provide all of those details. I don't think it needs to be an invasion of privacy, in people's personal lives, that kind of thing. But I think for public work that people do on elected boards, things that are transparent to a degree and perhaps should be more transparent. I think it's important to have as much information out there as we can.
It's a very, very difficult balancing act because Bill's made a couple of points, and I just want to tease them out. One, in many cases, these people are volunteers, and your first response should be gratitude, that they are giving up their evening or their afternoon or their morning to do work on behalf of our towns, without remuneration and sometimes without any thank you. And we need them. We need them to conduct the business of our towns. And never mind that it cuts costs, which it does, which in turn keeps taxes lower. But it also gives a personal and very involved touch to the work that they're doing. So the first response is gratitude. But as Bill also said, point 2, information that is not an invasion of privacy and is in no way untrue or slanted, but in fact is on the public record, sometimes really needs to be underscored for the public. Did you know that this is how this decision was made, or that this was the ethical concern with this activity? And you can lose a dinner invitation, but you have to tease out what you feel the public needs to know. Isn't that the basis?
I think so, and I think there's a flip side to it as well, which is particularly in the social media age where you read on local community Facebook boards, accusations that are made about public officials,
absolutely,
about decisions that are made, and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there may be facts missing. And I think it's helpful to the people that are serving in those volunteer roles for there to be robust reporting that puts all the information out there, in a fair way, so that people have can have informed opinions as opposed to speculation and accusations.
Again, to underscore what Bill said, transparency and an informed electorate. That's why I do this, and I'll bet you that's why you do this. It's so important. The Thomas Jefferson quote, should I choose between living with a government with no newspapers or a free without a free press or a free press without government, I should not hesitate before picking the latter. And it's really important. If the electorate isn't informed, by gosh, how do you know how to vote? And then what happens to democracy? So,
yeah, and I think, speaking of elections, you look at local elections coming up this year, and you look at where there are competitive races and where there aren't. And there's a lot of factors for why people are less likely to put themselves forward today. Part of it is the environment. It's not an easy job. You get those things hurled at you on social media. You may get, impertinent, pesky questions from people like you and I.
Yes.
But if you go back and look, as you probably have, you look at old newspapers from the Berkshires. You look at the Berkshire Courier, which was the weekly paper for the southern part of the county.
Transcripts.
And you also look at old Berkshire Eagles. When there weren't alternate, when there was obviously no internet. But you look at the depth of the coverage. The number of reporters they had covering every meeting in Great Barrington. I just wrote a piece a week or two ago that included some history about a time when the Select Board in Great Barrington was unhappy with some news coverage of some of the battles they were having and arguments. And so for, I think it was about 10 months, maybe 9 or 10 months, they closed their meetings to both the public and the press. So no one was allowed in unless you had business, and if there were public hearings, they were open. But other than that, they sent their clerk out at the end of each meeting to reveal, what they wanted. And that became a core issue in the election that they had in January, I think, of 1936. This was 35, 36. And it was around the time that there was a rise of authoritarianism and fascism in Europe when the free press was being squelched. And there were a lot of very interesting parallels. But when you do any historical research looking at old newspapers here, I find it fascinating the detail of the smallest event, and that every board was getting covered. Whereas today, that's not true. It's just a function of available resources, people trying to cover what they can. Which is one of the reasons why I think a lot of journalists feel like hybrid remote access, recorded meetings, and even going forward using some tools for recording and automatic transcripts would be really useful for informing people, since you can't be at every meeting and you can't watch all the dozens of meetings happening in the Berkshires, board meetings, that it can be hours long.
We have the ability now to have alternate forms for communication. People have different opinions about the internet, but certainly Zoom and televised kinds of things, and print. And we should take advantage of all of them. I agree with you, and we should certainly here at CTSB. As many of the meetings as they possibly can should be on and up and archived for as long as they can be. People are pushed for time. They may not be able to attend the meeting that happens at 4 p.m., but they can watch it at 11:30. And we should do that. But the other thing that's very interesting, you mentioned the 30s. People kind of waited for if this government that is in place now, this administration, is moving towards authoritarianism or an autocracy, when are they going to turn off the press in its forms, television, print, and so forth? And they're not doing it. And they're not doing it because they did a whole nother thing, which in my opinion is much more dangerous. And that is they discredited all of us.
Yeah, I think they are actually quite aggressively going after the free press. I think it's certainly been the president's stated goal, which he's told. I think it was Leslie Stahl on CBS some years ago. She asked him, why he was saying these things and about the press and attacking the press and fake news, and he said it was to undermine, to undermine the press.
The public won't believe
right.
it.
And I think there are a lot of factors.
Which is almost the identical quote.
Yeah, and it's not just, obviously not just him. I think in this environment, the partisanship that's online and social media and the arguments. But I think what this administration has already been doing, and what Trump himself has done in lawsuits, in going after public media, both NPR, but also Voice of America, really important news outlets.
Yes, those they're closing down.
Trying to.
Or whatever, to whatever degree they can. But, since I retired, the thing I'm most interested in is American history. So I'm with 12 books behind me, and so I guess I can say I'm a historian. And I think that context is very, very interesting. And I think that it's going to be much harder if what people suspect is the goal of this administration. They're going to have a harder row to hoe, because we have a 250-year history of having news, having information, being able to express our opinion, being able to have a march or a rally or whatever. It's harder to take things away from people that they've experienced than it is to continue to suppress them if they haven't. And I was just thinking of Germany, and not just the press, which was easy enough to shut down in Nazi Germany, but of the courts. And they rolled over immediately, and one of the reasons they did is the Weimar Republic was only 15 years old, and they had a 1,000-year history of an autocracy, of a kingdom. So it kind of made sense. Let the leader be all-powerful. Here, it's going to be very, very hard to do, whether it's the courts or the newspapers. I think
it'll be difficult, but I'm gravely concerned. I think.
Oh yeah, I'm not unconcerned.
Yeah. I didn't get the sense you are, but I think that what's happening now. Take a look at the crackdown that we're seeing right now on
with ICE.
Sure. Well, the speech of immigrants, who have and people on various kinds of visas. It's still First Amendment rights, and if you look at this, if their speech is so dangerous that the administration believes they need to be deported. Many of the things they're saying are things that opinion journalists say on op-ed pages every day.
Every day, every single day.
And that Americans say, every day. And they may have controversial or unpopular opinions, but that seems to be a slippery slope on where we're headed right now.
Absolutely, and people think in extreme terms. Are they going to eliminate Social Security? Well, they don't have to. They've already hobbled the post office. Just take 3 months to deliver a check. With respect to the courts, ignore the decision. With respect to journalism, discredit the speaker or the writer. It's much easier to make incremental steps like that and have people not know quite what to do about it. Max Weber said that if you want social change, there has to be death, because that's absolute. So if people, the Triangle Shirt Factory in this country, when the doors were locked and the fire started and there was no way for those workers to exit, staircases were locked, windows were nailed shut. They threw furniture through the windows and dove into the street. And that was an ordinary street in New York with women pushing strollers and carrying grocery bags and going about their everyday business. And then there were dead people on the street. That catches attention. But as you said, if you do it incrementally, you get away with it much longer. So, yeah, I'm gravely concerned, sure.
And I think also to your point, that incrementalism, which we've seen unfolding, it is often harder to believe that it's happening to the extent that it is. But you look at the kind of authoritarian playbook around the world, and many of the things that are happening now, particularly with the press, as it's a well-trodden path.
It is. It is. My friend, what a delight talking to you.
My pleasure, Carol. Always.
We could talk all day. We should do it again.
I look forward to it.
And in the meantime, please tell the audience where they can find your work.
BerkshireArgus.com.
Good.
Website, long-form reporting and other things. Free. It's a nonprofit. No paywall. So available to everybody.
Good.
Do
you take contributions?
Well, of course, yeah, all reader supported.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're hungry for more detail and a reporter you can trust, Bill Shein, thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol.